and when every one of us is feeling the heat of global warming now more than ever before. Asia, the continent with the largest landmass extending to the Arctic, is warming faster than global average. But perhaps there is still hope to make a change. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's panel discussion on Green Space, Media for Climate Action, an event organized by the Sri Lanka Press Institute to coincide with the World Press Freedom Day. I apologize for starting your day on a grey note, but that is the reality in which we are living at the moment. For today's discussion, we have two policy-level experts who will discuss about addressing climate change issues in Sri Lanka as well as the South Asian region. Without further ado, let me now introduce the two esteemed panelists. On to my right, we have with us Mr. Ruwan Wijewardena, or to my left actually, Mr. Ruwan Wijewardena, who is currently the Senior Advisor to the President on Climate Change. Mr. Wijewardena also served as the former State Minister of Defense and the former Cabinet Minister for Mass Media. He is the Deputy Leader of the United National Party and the Chief Organizer for the Khmer Electorate. On the extreme left is Dr. Anuragha Ghosh, who is an internationally recognized public policy expert, author, columnist, and institution builder. He is the founder, CEO of the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, and has led it to the top ranks as one of Asia's leading policy research institutions among the world's 20 best climate think tanks. Dr. Ghosh advises governments, industry, civil society, and international organizations around the world, writes columns, and has been featured in several documentaries. During this session, Dr. Ghosh will provide us insights to climate change crisis within the South Asian region. I'd like to warmly welcome our two esteemed panelists. This discussion will be held in two rounds, where in the first we will focus on policy-level decisions that have been taken to address the climate change crisis within the South Asian region and Sri Lanka. During the second round, we will discuss about the role of media in addressing climate change, followed by a Q&A session. I also like to thank the Indian High Commission for facilitating Dr. Ghosh's visit and for providing us with this opportunity. To start this discussion and to put things in context, I would like to ask Dr. Ghosh to briefly explain some unique climate change patterns you have identified within the South Asian region.
Yes. Good morning. Thank you so much for having me as part of this panel, and of course I'm delighted to be here with Mr. Wijewardena to discuss this issue. As I was mentioning offline, I'm here also to listen and learn. Let me start by what is the situation globally. We have this number 1.5 Celsius. What does that mean? Basically means that above pre-industrial levels, can we limit global average surface temperature rise to 1.5 degrees? Now, note my words carefully. Global average surface temperatures. But that does not mean that in specific geographies that 1.5 is sufficient. Especially in the tropics and in a region like South Asia, a global average 1.5 actually could translate to much higher levels of temperature rise, as we are already witnessing in some parts of South Asia. We have reached that 1.5 Celsius mark. But what does that actually translate to? Because one could argue, well, you and I can step outside through the day, there's 1.5, 2 degrees, 3 degrees temperature variation. What's the problem? The problem is that this averages is not the only thing that matters. What matters is what begins to happen in specific geographies and in the extremes. So let's take one of the impacts. If you take extreme events like floods, droughts, cyclones. My country is a large country, and yet we see that 3/4 of our districts have now become hotspots for such extreme climate events. Sri Lanka is what could be called a small island state, but then you're buffeted across the country, both by extreme climate events that might be coming from the seas and the oceans, but also what happens inland. So what this translates into is heat stress. So let me give you an example. On average, say India experiences about 4 to 8 days of extreme heat or heat wave in a single summer. That is the normal. This summer, we are expected now to experience up to 20 days of heat wave. That is more than a doubling from the normal. Let's take another example, precipitation. We see that broadly the scientific models will say with rising temperatures, you will have more days of intense rainfall, but also an average decrease in rainfall. But you need to then translate it into what happens at a localized level. We just released at CEW an analysis of the 4,500 plus tehsils or sub-districts that we have. And we see that there is a secular decline in the overall precipitation we see in many of these districts. And where that happens matters, because it is when you start sowing your crop, if in the period when the irrigation water is needed or the rainfall is needed, if it's those very weeks when the precipitation drops, then it does not matter that through the rainfall season you have, normal rains or even above normal rains. So heat stress matters because then it is a public health problem. Heat stress matters because then outdoor productivity of labor declines. Heat stress matters because the integrity of infrastructure begins to get impacted. We are all fast-growing emerging economies, means we are putting in more infrastructure. And how do you make that infrastructure resilient against these extreme events? Precipitation changes matter for our agriculture. And then, of course, extreme weather matters for our macroeconomy. Because as developing countries, we all have limited resources. And when you are impacted by extreme weather, which is not just a one-off, but begins to happen year after year after year, then the economic resource, the fiscal resources to respond becomes diluted, but they also become diverted from the other developmental expenditures we need to undertake. So climate and climate change is not just an environmental challenge, especially for fast-growing developing economies. It is a macroeconomic challenge, it is an infrastructure challenge, it is an economic development challenge, it's a jobs challenge, it's a gender challenge. And that is how we have to start internalizing what we are faced with before we start building our resilience.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh, for